Welcome back, everybody, to another deep dive. Today, we're looking at something that, well, it feels kind of ripped from the headlines, but has some serious long-term consequences that I think we're only just starting to get a handle on.
Yeah.
We're going to be talking about the dropped investigation into former President Trump's alleged efforts to overturn the 2020 election results.
Yeah, it's a situation that really raises a very fundamental question. Can a sitting president actually be held legally accountable for actions taken while they're in office?
Exactly. And to kind of unpack all of this, we're going to be diving deep into the partially released report from special counsel Jack Smith. And I think one of the most striking takeaways from this report is that Smith very clearly believes there was sufficient evidence to charge Trump.
Yeah, and the report doesn't really mince words on this point. It lays out some very specific accusations that Trump directly pressured officials to try to manipulate those election results.
It's like something you'd see in a movie or something. But it gets even more unsettling when you read that the report claims that Trump was knowingly spreading false information about election fraud, even going so far as to exploit the January 6th Capitol riot for his own gain.
Yeah, those are some extremely serious accusations. And the report goes on to detail how Trump used his platform, particularly social media, to try to apply pressure on witnesses, on courts, and even Justice Department employees who were connected to the investigation.
But here's where things get really kind of tricky constitutionally. A sitting president is protected from being indicted. And so Trump's re-election in 2024 effectively shielded him from any potential legal consequences for these actions.
Yeah, and this situation, I think, really exposes a potential vulnerability in our system. Is it possible that political power can supersede legal processes? It's something we really need to consider.
It's definitely something to think about. What's your take on the implications of all of this? Is there any kind of historical precedent that we can look to for something like this?
Well, there are definitely echoes of past situations where you've had legal proceedings involving powerful figures and they kind of intersect with election cycles. But I think the specifics of this case, with the allegations being what they are and the timing of Trump's reelection, they really do create an unprecedented scenario. And it begs the question, are our current systems, as they stand, are they really equipped to handle something like this?
So what happens next? Does this set some kind of dangerous precedent?
Yeah.
If a president can essentially avoid legal repercussions simply by getting reelected, what kind of message does that send?
Well, that's a question that legal scholars and political analysts will likely be debating for many years to come. But even the report itself kind of acknowledges this complexity, with Smith stating that while we were not able to bring the cases we charged to trial, I believe the fact that our team stood up for the rule of law matters.
So it sounds like Smith, despite having to drop the charges, is really trying to underscore how important it is to hold people in positions of power accountable, even when it seems like you're facing insurmountable obstacles. But is that enough to really maintain public trust in the legal system?
That's a really crucial point, because public perception and the erosion of trust, they are very real concerns when you're dealing with a situation like this. And even if you could say that the legal system functioned exactly as it was intended, the perception that justice was somehow sidestepped can be just as damaging.
And it's not just about this one particular case. The implications of something like this could ripple outward and influence future cases. It's possible this could even embolden other people in positions of power to act with a sense of impunity.
Exactly. If the system appears to allow for people to circumvent accountability, then it creates a very dangerous precedent. This is exactly why this case is so important to analyze and understand, not just for what happened, but for what it could mean going forward.
Now, we've been focusing mainly on the election interference accusations, but the special counsel's report also spends time looking into Trump's handling of classified documents. Is there any connection between these two parts of the report, or are they totally separate issues?
That's a good question. I think while they are technically separate investigations, they both kind of touch upon a similar theme, this idea of potential abuse of power and the challenges that come with holding a former president accountable.
So even though these cases are legally distinct, they might actually be connected in a broader sense, kind of adding to this narrative about the limits of accountability for people in these really high offices.
Yeah, precisely. And just the fact that these investigations even happened at all, the fact that these serious accusations were made against a former president, that speaks to the really unusual circumstances that we're facing right now. It raises these fundamental questions about the balance of power and whether our institutions are really effective in making sure that no one is above the law.
Yeah, it makes you wonder if a special counsel, with all the authority and resources of the Justice Department behind them, couldn't get a conviction with what other mechanisms are in place to make sure that people are held accountable in these kinds of situations.
That is the million-dollar question, isn't it? It seems like we're in uncharted territory here, trying to figure out how to deal with a scenario that our system wasn't necessarily designed to handle.
And what about the public? How are people supposed to wrap their heads around all of this? It's a lot to take in.
It really is, and that's why it's so important for us to be having these open and honest discussions about these issues. The special counsel's report, even though it's only partially released, it still gives us a lot of insight into how complicated it is to navigate legal and political power. We really need to scrutinize these findings and debate what they mean and consider what kinds of reforms we could make to strengthen our institutions and prevent these kinds of abuses of power from happening again in the future.
And the report itself even says that some details were left out to protect ongoing investigations and sensitive information, which makes you wonder what else is hidden in those redacted sections.
Right, and those redactions raise some serious questions about transparency and the public's right to know. I think there's going to be a big legal fight over fully releasing the report, which is just going to complicate this whole situation even further.
It's like this story is still being written. Every new development just adds another layer of complexity to it.
Hmm.
And it feels like this deep dive has only scratched the surface.
I think that's right, and it really highlights how important it is to stay informed and to think critically about the information that we're taking in. We can't just accept things at face value. We have to question things, analyze them, and try to find different perspectives to get a more complete understanding of these complicated issues.
And maybe even more importantly, we need to think about what all of this says about the health of our democracy. If a president can potentially find ways to avoid being held accountable, what does that mean for the future of our country?
That's a really big question, and it's one that we all need to be thinking about. This case has shown us some potential weaknesses in our system, and it's our responsibility as citizens to talk about these things and demand changes that will strengthen our democratic institutions.
So what can we do as individuals?
No.
What are some steps that we can take to ensure that people in power are held accountable no matter what their political beliefs are?
Well, I think the first step is to be informed. We need to learn more about how our legal and political systems work, what their flaws are, and how we can fix them.
And then we need to use what we know to fight for real change. We can support groups that are fighting for government transparency. We can reach out to our elected officials to voice our concerns, and we can have productive conversations with our friends and family about these issues.
Every little thing we do adds up and helps to create a movement towards a society that's more just and equitable. It's about speaking up, demanding accountability, and working together to build a system that truly reflects the values of our democracy.
I think this deep dive has really opened our eyes to the challenges that our democracy is facing, and how important it is for us to be engaged citizens to protect it. It's a good reminder that our freedoms are precious, and we can't take them for granted. We need to actively participate in shaping the future that we want. Wow. It really does feel like we've uncovered some kind of crack in the foundation of how we think our system works.
Yeah.
You know? It's a little unsettling, but I think that's what makes these deep dives so valuable. It forces us to really confront those uncomfortable truths and ask those really tough questions.
Yeah, and sometimes those questions don't have easy answers, but just the act of asking them, of really grappling with these complicated issues, that's what's important for a healthy democracy.
You know, at the beginning, we asked this question, can a sitting president truly escape legal accountability? And I think after this deep dive, it's clear that the answer is much more complicated than a simple yes or no.
Absolutely. It's not about finding a simple answer. It's about really understanding the nuances of the situation and recognizing that there's the potential for good outcomes and bad outcomes.
And maybe that's the most important thing we can take away from all of this. We can't just sit back and assume that the system will magically fix itself. You know, we, the people, need to be active participants in making sure that our democracy is strong and healthy.
Exactly. We need to stay informed, stay engaged, and be willing to hold our leaders accountable no matter what their political beliefs are. That's what makes a democracy work.
So where do we go from here? What can we actually do to make sure that the principles of accountability and justice are being upheld?
Well, I think the first step is education. We need to keep learning about our legal and political systems, how they work, what their weaknesses are, and how we can improve them.
And then we have to use that knowledge to push for real change. We can support those groups that are fighting for transparency in government. We can contact our elected officials and let them know what we're thinking, and we can talk to our friends and family about these important issues.
Every little bit helps, and all those small actions come together to create a movement towards a more just and fair society. It's about making our voices heard, demanding accountability, and working together to build a system that really represents our democratic values.
Well, this deep dive has really been an eye-opening experience. It's not just about the specifics of one case, it's about the bigger challenges and opportunities that our democracy is facing. It's a good reminder that we can't take our freedoms for granted. We have to work to protect them and create the future that we want.
And I think that's a great point to end on. The future of our democracy isn't set in stone. It's shaped by the choices we make, the actions we take, and the conversations we have. So let's keep talking, keep learning, keep questioning, and keep working together to build a better future for everyone.
Well said. And on that note that wraps up this deep dive, we hope you found it informative and interesting and that you feel empowered to make a difference. Remember, knowledge is power, and the more we know, the better prepared we are to shape the world around us. So until next time, keep on diving deep.